My name's Suzuki, and I think desmodromic valves are stupid. You grew up with Ducati posters on the wall. Dad had Ducatis in the garage. As a kid, you rode Suzuki SV650s because it was the closest sounding thing you could get to a Ducati. And then you grow up and you finally buy one. But it's 20 years old and you decide to take it to the racetrack. Good idea, right?
Hey guys, it's Tristan from Florida Moto Talk. On this channel, John and I spend a lot of time discussing budget bikes, and you certainly can ride on the street or on the track on a pretty reasonable budget. I've actually done it, slapped some of my dad's takeoffs onto my SV650S, take the mirrors and license plate off, tape the headlight, ride it on the track all weekend, and put it back together Monday morning, and ride it to school or work later that day. Even like this, on my 4th or 5th track day, I got down to low 130s with a stopwatch time best of a 130 flat. By no means fast, but certainly not slow either, especially for a street bike. And while I don't recommend riding your only mode of transport on the track because accidents do happen, it is possible. However, this is not a sport particularly driven by sanity. Motorcyclists tend to be a passionate bunch, and I am certainly no exception. So today I'm launching what might become a bit of a How Expensive Is It series on this channel. So this would be episode 1, making a 20-year-old Ducati Superbike a functional track bike. Let me give a little more backstory. For as long as I can remember, there had been a minimum of 2 Ducatis in the garage at home. For a long time that count was up to 4. My dad had a 916 that I was lucky enough to throw down the road at Jennings, but there'll be a little more on that later. And a Panta street bike, like an 80s Panta 600, I believe. He then later built Panta and TT2 race bikes and went on to win a bunch of WERA national championships on those. Long story short, Ducati is in my blood. I was 11 years old when the Ducati 999 and 749 were first written about in magazines, and I was obsessed. I can clearly remember the ad for the 749 with Neil Hodgson awkwardly sitting on one, where it talked about the power and aerodynamics, and I must have read that ad 100 times. I actually remember it so clearly, I went looking for it not too long ago, and I found and bought a copy of it to frame and put on the wall eventually. I've also had a model 999 since 2003 or 2004. So fast forward in life, I start riding myself and always wanted a Ducati, but it wasn't in the budget. Throughout my 20s, I struggled with alcoholism, but I finally got myself together in my 30s, and first thing I did was start looking for a cheap 600 to take to the track. So then one day, a 749S pops up in Marketplace, and I quickly decided, instead of going the budget route, I wanted to get my dream bike. So I have no regrets, and the bike is fantastic, but the following is the saga of what it takes to properly convert a temperamental and aging Italian superbike into a track and tire devouring machine. So to start, I picked up the 749S because it comes with an upgraded three-way adjustable suspension front and rear, as well as a Termi race exhaust installed from the factory. So I hadn't been on track for 12 years. I knew the suspension would be more than enough while I found speed again. And the exhaust tweaks between the S and the standard 749 take the bike from 103 to 110 horsepower, which is more than enough, especially on my home track of Jennings. Plus, it's not really a Ducati unless its soundtrack is coming out of Termi's. So exhaust is done and suspension is sorted, at least for now. So the asking price on the bike I found was $5,000. Very reasonable, so I panic finished assembling my trailer before someone could snatch the bike. So I negotiated the price of the bike down to $4,500, loaded her up, and brought her home. I could not have been happier. The test ride was the first time I had ridden a motorcycle in 5 years, and it all happened so fast I had to borrow a helmet from a friend. The subframe of the bike was cracked from a minor low side, so before I could do anything, that had to be replaced. I'm relatively handy, although I really don't enjoy wrenching, so I was able to do that myself. Next up was an oil change, as the previous owner was hazy on when it had last been done. I wanted to stick with OEM filters and fancy Moto oil, so even doing it myself gets expensive. Next, I had to replace the bent shift lever. The clutch lever was also bent into an uncomfortable position, so I replaced the clutch and brake lever as well. So with basic functionality restored, I started looking for a slipper clutch. I found one used out in California for $410 that I was, with some guessing and checking, able to install myself. At this point, I was riding on the street and keeping the RPMs low because I needed to have the valves and belts checked. The dreaded Desmo service was certainly not something I was going to take on by myself. So one day the bike decides to die on me and wouldn't start again. I was confused as to why, tried a new battery, but that didn't work. So as I was pushing the bike more than a half mile home, I decided I was done wrenching. The bike was going to go to Ducati of Tampa Bay. It turned out the ethanol in modern fuel had worn through the resin that protects the fuel pump wiring in the tank. So Ducati of Tampa fixed that and recommended that if it's a track bike that's going to sit for periods of time, I should really be using ethanol-free fuel that the bike was built for. They also completed the Desmo service, which was obviously overdue and in rough shape. So since I was already in pretty deep, they cut me a deal on everything else. So I had them flush the fluids, change the brake pads, chain and sprockets, and install some Super Corsa SPs. So that's the Super Corsa that has a street compound in the center, but a softer track compound on the sides, because I was still riding the bike on the street at that point. So at this point, it was time to start committing to converting it to track use only. So first was a front fairing stay to replace the headlight but still allow usage of the gauge cluster. That also had the happy benefit of between the mirrors, headlight, OEM fairing stay, and then also the taillight and license plate frame, removing 16 pounds from the bike, mostly at the front. Next was track fairings and a new seat, because the one that was on the bike was missing one of its anchor points. So I decided to go with pre-painted, measured, and drilled Chinese fairings. They weren't quite as measured and pre-drilled as advertised, but I kind of expected that. So it was a little bit more work to get them all lined up, but overall they look really good, and they were less expensive than higher quality unpainted parts. So as I mentioned earlier, I have crashed a 916, which externally has the same engine dimensions, and it ground through the water pump. So I purchased GB Racing water pump and alternator covers, and they came in a set with an oil sight glass cover that fits 848 1098 models, not the 749. However, that's okay with me because I'm probably going to buy a 1098 soon anyway. Help me, I have a problem. So then I got a Woodcraft clutch cover with replaceable sliders. It is a track bike after all, and accidents will happen, but hopefully not. I also bought a Shore-Eye battery, mostly because they store well, but there's also a couple pounds in weight savings there. So with it being a Ducati, they do have a habit of eating batteries, and with the slipper clutch, I'm not sure how quickly it'll eat clutch plates, so I took the battery I bought when the bike died, and I've kept that as a spare, and I bought another set of clutch plates to keep on hand at all times when I'm at the track. They aren't installed yet, but I also picked up some DNA Race air filters on sale. And lastly, because in all my track riding before, I never had these things, I bought tire warmers and a lap timer. So at this point, with the bike and the trailer, that brings the total up to $13,824.36. So the good news is I was able to sell some of the parts I took off the bike, and I still have more stuff for sale. So I sold the old bent shift lever, the exhaust shield, right mirror, left mirror, and right fairing set. But then on the downside, I needed a wheel chock, a spare wheel for the trailer, gloves, helmet, undersuit, boots, leathers, ramp, canyon dancers, battery tender, etc., 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 for an additional total of $3,249.13. So essentially, that brings my grand total for gear, bike, trailer, basically on the track if I were using pump gas, to $16,580.71. A 20-year-old Ducati Superbike is by no means a budget bike. However, the rest of my setup, the trailer and gear and stuff, is pretty budget conscious. I went with high-end boots, high-end gloves, and a high-end helmet. But otherwise, I did things pretty sensibly money-wise. So this episode really isn't about budget control, though. It's about the true cost of a passion project. And what I can say without a doubt is the sound and feel of riding my childhood dream bike is more than worth every single penny.